A Navy helicopter touches down at a college graduation ceremony. Hundreds of people freeze, cameras turn, whispers explode through the crowd. And one woman, a woman who had just been called useless by her own mother, in front of her entire family, begins walking toward it. This is the story of Grace Kelly. Not the actress, not a princess, just a daughter who spent 34 years being invisible to the people who were supposed to love her. The story arrived in our inbox 3 weeks ago. When we read it, our entire team went silent. Grace's mother had always favored her younger sister Emma, the golden child, the one with the perfect grades, the perfect career, the perfect life to brag about. Grace. She was the disappointment, the one who never amounted to anything, the one whose 12 years of military service were dismissed as probably just desk work. On the day of Emma's master's graduation, Grace made the trip home. She hadn't seen her family in months. She thought maybe, just maybe, someone would ask how she was doing. No one did. For nearly 2 hours, Grace stood among her own family while they celebrated Emma. Photos were taken, speeches were made, congratulations flowed like champagne. Not a single person spoke to Grace beyond hello. And then her mother turned to a group of relatives and said the words that would change everything. Grace has always been useless. 12 years in uniform and nothing to show for it. Emma is the real success in this family. Grace heard every word. She didn't react. She didn't cry. She didn't defend herself. She simply looked at her watch. 15 minutes later, a Navy helicopter appeared over the horizon. It landed on the field next to the graduation stage. A uniformed officer stepped out, medals gleaming, posture rigid, and walked directly toward Grace. What he said next made her mother's face turn white. What Grace did after that destroyed her family's entire world. But here's what no one satisfying Grace had been waiting for this moment. Not for revenge, for proof. Proof of something she had suspected for years, a truth so painful, so devastating, that once it came out, nothing in that family would ever be the same. The helicopter wasn't the surprise. What Grace had been hiding for 12 years, that was the surprise, and her family was about to find out, in front of everyone. My name is Grace Kelly. I am 34 years old, a lieutenant commander in the United States Navy, and I have spent the last 12 years of my life doing work that nobody in my family knows about. This is the story of the day I stopped being invisible, not because I finally spoke up, but because I finally stopped waiting for permission to leave. I arrived at Emma's graduation ceremony at exactly 10:15 in the morning. The sun was bright over the university campus, and families were already gathering on the lawn, clutching programs and cameras dressed in their Sunday best. I wore a simple navy blue dress, appropriate, modest, forgettable. That was intentional. I had spent my entire life learning how to take up as little space as possible in my own family, and old habits die hard, even when you know they are killing you. Emma was receiving her master's degree that day, business administration. My mother had talked about nothing else for months. Every phone call, every holiday, every rare visit home, it always circled back to Emma. Emma's thesis, Emma's internship, Emma's bright future. I listened to it all with the patience of someone who had long ago stopped expecting anything different. I smiled when I was supposed to smile. I nodded when I was supposed to nod. I played the role of the supportive older sister so well that sometimes I almost believed it myself. But I was not there to celebrate Emma. Not really. I was there to close a chapter, to give my family one final chance before I disappeared from their lives, in a way none of them could imagine. 3 weeks earlier, I had received official notification that my Distinguished Service Medal ceremony was confirmed for June 15th, the same day as Emma's graduation. The Navy had set the date, not me. When I saw it on the calendar, I felt something I had not felt in years, a strange, quiet clarity. I could have skipped the graduation entirely. No one would have been surprised. Grace never shows up. Grace is always busy with her little job. Grace has never been part of this family, not really. But something made me want to come. Not hope. I had given up on hope a long time ago. It was more like a final experiment, A test I already knew the answer to, but needed to see with my own eyes before I could walk away for good. My mother spotted me within minutes of my arrival. She walked over with that tight smile she always wore when she was about to say something cruel wrapped in politeness. "Grace, you actually came." She looked me up and down, her eyes cataloguing every detail of my appearance, searching for something to criticize. "I wasn't sure you would bother. You know how busy you always are with your work?" The way she said the word work made it sound like something embarrassing, something to be whispered about rather than discussed. I had heard that tone my entire life. My mother was not a monster. She was something more complicated and in some ways more damaging. She was a woman who needed to control the story of her family, and I had never fit into the narrative she wanted to tell. Emma was the success. Emma was the beauty. Emma was the one who made her proud. And me, I was the cautionary tale, the difficult one. The daughter who refused to compete, and therefore, in my mother's eyes, had already lost. I used to think the favoritism was about love. I used to cry myself to sleep, wondering what I had done wrong, what I could change to make her see me the way she saw Emma. But somewhere around my 19th birthday, I stopped crying. I realized the truth: my mother did not favor Emma because she loved her more. She favored Emma because Emma was easier to control. Emma sought approval. Emma needed validation. Emma would reshape herself to fit whatever mold my mother designed. I would not. And for that, I had to be diminished. Not destroyed, just kept small enough that I could never threaten the order my mother had built. So I learned to be silent. Not because I was weak, but because I understood something that took me years to accept. Explaining yourself to someone who has already decided who you are is the fastest way to lose yourself. Every defense I offered became evidence of my guilt. Every achievement I mentioned became bragging. Every boundary I tried to set became proof that I was difficult. So I stopped. I stopped defending. I stopped explaining. I stopped hoping. And in that silence, I built a life they knew nothing about, a life that would reveal itself soon enough. I found a seat near the back of the ceremony and watched my family from a distance. My father was up front, camera in hand, photographing Emma as she laughed with her classmates. He caught my eye for just a moment. Something flickered across his face, recognition, maybe, or something heavier. Then he looked away, quickly, as if I were someone he did not want to think about for too long. I filed that away. It meant something, but I did not have time to examine it yet. My phone buzzed, a message from an encrypted number, the kind that only a handful of people in the world had access to. I glanced at the screen. 15:30, hours confirmed. Don't be late for your ceremony. I checked my watch. 11:47 a.m. 43 minutes until 12:30, the deadline. I had set for myself in the quiet of my own mind. If no one in my family asked me a single question about my life in the next 43 minutes, I would have my answer. I would know beyond any doubt that I had made the right decision. I put the phone back in my purse and settled into my seat. Around me, families embraced, took photos, celebrated milestones. My own family was 20 feet away, and not one of them had spoken to me beyond a greeting. 43 minutes. That was all I gave them. 43 minutes to see me, to ask one question, to prove me wrong. The clock was ticking. And no one knew it but me. The minutes passed slowly the way they always do, when you are waiting for something you already know will not come. I sat in my chair near the back of the ceremony, watching my family move through the crowd like actors in a play I'd seen 1,000 times before. My mother was in her element, her hand on Emma's arm, guiding her from one group of admirers to the next. My father trailed behind with his camera, documenting every smile, every handshake, every moment of triumph. No one looked back to see if I was still there. No one ever did. I have spent 12 years in the United States Navy. 12 years of service that my family has never once asked about in any meaningful way. At first I told myself they were simply busy, distracted by their own lives, caught up in the daily demands that consume everyone. Then I told myself they were being respectful of classified information, that perhaps they assumed I could not talk about my work, and so they did not want to put me in an awkward position. But I stopped believing those excuses a long time ago. The truth is simpler and far more painful. They never asked because they had already decided the answer would not impress them. 6 years ago, during a rare holiday visit, my mother made a comment that I have never forgotten. We were sitting in the living room, and someone on the television was talking about military heroes, soldiers returning from deployment to tearful reunions with their families. My mother glanced at the screen and then at me, and she said, "I suppose your job is mostly desk work, not like those real soldiers." She said it casually, the way you might comment on the weather, as if she were stating an obvious fact rather than dismissing everything I had ever done. I did not correct her. I did not explain. I simply nodded and changed the subject, because I had learned by then that the truth would not matter to someone who had already written the story in her head. The reality of my work is something I cannot fully describe, not because it is classified, though much of it is, but because it exists in a space that most people do not even know exists. I am not the face of military success. I do not appear in recruitment videos or give speeches at patriotic events. I am called when everything has already gone wrong, when missions fail, when assets are compromised, when someone has to make the impossible decision, abort retreat, or choose the option that will cause the least amount of damage. I have saved lives by making calls that ended careers, including the careers of people who outranked me. I have sat in rooms where the weight of a single word could determine whether people lived or died, and I have carried that weight without complaint, without recognition, without anyone ever knowing my name. That is the nature of my work. To be effective, I must be invisible. Credit would mean exposure, and exposure would mean compromise. So I became the Navy's shadow, the woman who fixes what cannot be publicly acknowledged. For 12 years, I have done this work in silence. And for 12 years, my family has assumed I was doing something unimportant, because I never came home with medals on my chest or stories to tell at dinner parties. They never considered that my silence was not a sign of failure, but a requirement of the job. They never wondered if there might be more to me than what they could see. My phone buzzed again. I glanced at the screen, shielding it from view, out of habit. Another encrypted message, helicopter ETA 12:45, confirm boarding. I typed back quickly, confirmed, but give me until 12:30. I checked the time, 12:07, 23 minutes, left in my deadline, 23 minutes for someone in my family to prove me wrong. I watched my mother introduce Emma to yet another group of people. I counted silently as she listed Emma's accomplishments, the master's degree, the job offer, the bright future ahead. 7 different introductions I had witnessed so far, and in each one, my mother's voice swelled with pride, her hand gesturing expansively as if presenting a prize she had won. My father took photographs. My aunts and uncles offered congratulations. The ceremony had ended half an hour ago, and the reception was in full swing, and I was standing less than 30 feet from my own family, and not one of them had spoken to me beyond the initial hello when I arrived. I was not angry. That surprised me, but it also did not. Anger requires expectation, and I had stopped expecting anything from these people years ago. What I felt instead was something quieter, something that had been building inside me for a very long time. I felt the slow, steady confirmation of a truth I had been afraid to fully accept. I did not belong here. I had never belonged here. And the only person still pretending otherwise was me. The minutes ticked by. 12:15, 12:22, 12:27. I watched the second hand on my watch move in its patient circle, marking time that my family did not know was running out. At 12:29, my mother laughed at something. Someone said, her head thrown back, her hand pressed to her chest in theatrical delight. At 12:30 exactly, I looked up from my watch and scanned the crowd one final time. My father was adjusting his camera settings. My mother was accepting a glass of champagne. Emma was posing for a photograph with her diploma. No one was looking at me. No one had looked at me in over an hour. I reached into my purse and silenced my phone. The helicopter would arrive in 15 minutes. My ride to a ceremony they knew nothing about, an honor they would never have believed I deserved. I could have told them. I could have walked over and announced it, forced them to see me, for once in their lives. But I did not want to be seen, because I demanded it. I wanted to be seen because they cared enough to look. And they did not. They never had. At 12:31, I felt something I had not felt in years. Relief. The test was over. They had failed. And now I was free to leave, not in anger, but in certainty. I stood there for a moment, letting the relief settle into my bones. It was strange feeling that weight lift after carrying it for so long. I had spent years wondering if I was being too harsh, too quick to judge, too unwilling to give my family the benefit of the doubt. But the test had been simple. 1 hour, one question. That was all I had asked for, and they could not even give me that. Now I knew. Now I could leave without wondering if I had made a mistake. I was reaching for my purse, preparing to slip away quietly before the helicopter arrived, when I heard it. The distant thrum of rotor blades cutting through the afternoon air. I looked up, shielding my eyes against the sun, and watched as the dark shape appeared on the horizon, growing larger with each passing second. Around me, the crowd began to notice. Heads turned, fingers pointed. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as everyone tried to understand what they were seeing. The helicopter descended toward the athletic field, adjacent to the ceremony grounds. It was a Navy MH-60 Seahawk, the kind used for special operations transport, though most civilians would not know that. All they saw was a military aircraft landing in the middle of a college graduation, and that was enough to send ripples of confusion and alarm through the crowd. Security guards began moving toward the landing area. A few people grabbed their children and stepped back. Someone shouted something about an emergency. The careful order of Emma's celebration was dissolving into chaos. I did not move. I stood perfectly still, watching the helicopter touch down, feeling the wash of wind from the rotors press against my dress. I had imagined this moment 100 times over the past 3 weeks, playing it out in my mind during sleepless nights and quiet moments between briefings. I had wondered how it would feel to finally step out of the shadows, to let my family see the truth they had refused to ask about. Now that it was happening, I felt nothing but calm. This was not a moment of triumph for me. It was simply the next step in a journey I had been walking alone for 12 years. The side door of the helicopter slid open, and a Navy officer stepped out. He was in full dress uniform, his medals catching the sunlight, his posture rigid with the kind of discipline that only comes from decades of service. He did not look at the crowd. He did not acknowledge the security guards approaching him. He walked directly toward me, his eyes fixed on mine, and when he reached me, he stopped and saluted. "Lieutenant Commander Kelly," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the stunned silence. "The Vice Admiral is waiting. Your Distinguished Service Medal ceremony begins at 15:30 hours. I returned the salute, my movements automatic after so many years. "Thank you, Captain. I'm ready." Behind me, I heard my mother's voice, sharp with confusion. "Medal? What medal?" The officer glanced past me, his expression shifting to something between surprise and disdain. "Ma'am, your daughter is receiving one of the highest honors in the United States Navy." He paused as if waiting for recognition that did not come. "I assumed you would know." The silence that followed was unlike anything I had ever experienced in my family. My mother, who always had something to say, who always had an opinion, or a criticism, or a carefully crafted narrative to maintain, stood speechless. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. For the first time in my life, I saw her completely without control. And then my father stepped forward. His face was pale, drained of color in a way I had never seen before. He moved slowly, like a man walking towards something he had been running from for a very long time. When he spoke, his voice shook. "I didn't know the details," he said, and I realized he was not speaking to my mother or to the officer. He was speaking to me. But I recognized the signs. The way you carried yourself when you came home. The phone calls at 3 in the morning. The times you disappeared and then something happened overseas the next day. He swallowed hard, his eyes glistening. I knew you were someone important. I knew there was more to you than what your mother believed. I never had the courage to say it. My mother turned on him, her shock transforming into something darker. You knew, and you never told me. My father looked at her, and in that look I saw 20 years of silence, 20 years of choosing peace over truth, 20 years of watching his daughter be diminished and saying nothing. Would you have believed me? He asked quietly. You decided who Grace was a long time ago. Nothing I said would have changed that. I became aware, in that moment, that we were being watched, not just by the crowd of graduation guests, frozen in place by the drama unfolding before them, but by a camera. My cousin had been live streaming Emma's ceremony, and she had not stopped recording. The phone was still held up, capturing everything: the helicopter, the officer's words, my mother's stunned silence, my father's confession. All of it preserved, forever broadcast to whoever was watching. My mother, who had spent her entire life controlling the story of our family, had just lost that control. Publicly, permanently, on camera. And there was nothing she could do to take it back. I looked at my father, the man who had seen the truth and chosen silence, the man who had watched me be diminished year after year and never found the courage to speak. Part of me wanted to thank him for finally saying something, but a larger part of me understood that his confession had come too late, not by days or months, but by years, decades even. Knowing and doing nothing, I said, my voice calm, almost gentle, is worse than not knowing at all. He flinched as if I had struck him. I did not wait for a response. I turned toward the helicopter, toward the officer waiting to escort me to the ceremony, where I would receive an honor my family had never imagined I could earn. Behind me, I heard my mother's voice rising, demanding explanations, trying to regain control of a situation that had already slipped beyond her grasp. I did not look back. I had taken perhaps 10 steps toward the helicopter when I heard footsteps behind me. Quick, desperate footsteps accompanied by a voice I had known my entire life, but had rarely heard so raw with emotion. Grace, wait. I stopped. Not because I owed her anything, but because some part of me, the part that had spent decades being the older sister, the protector, the one who fixed things without asking for credit, could not walk away without at least hearing what she had to say. Emma reached me, her face streaked with tears, her carefully applied makeup running in dark lines down her cheeks. She grabbed my arm, her fingers trembling. I don't understand, she said, her voice breaking. Why didn't you ever tell us? Why didn't you ever say anything about what you do, who you are? I would have. I looked at my younger sister, the golden child, the favorite, the one who had received everything I had been denied, the attention, the praise, the unwavering belief that she was destined for greatness. But as I looked at her now, I did not see a rival or an enemy. I saw a woman who had been shaped by the same mother, molded into a different role, never given the chance to see beyond the narrative she had been fed her entire life. And I saw someone I had protected more times than she would ever know. I leaned in close, lowering my voice so that only she could hear me. Do you remember that night 8 years ago? Your car broke down on the highway at 2 in the morning. You were drunk. You called someone and a stranger came and helped you get home. You told Mom the next day that you got lucky that some good Samaritan stopped and fixed your car. Emma's face went white. Her grip on my arm loosened. How do you know about that? Because it wasn't a stranger, Emma. It was me. I drove 3 hours in the middle of the night because you called a number I had given you for emergencies. I found you on the side of the road, terrified and crying, and I got you home safe. The next morning, Mum said you were lucky. She never asked who helped you. I paused, letting the weight of the words settle between us. And you never wondered. Emma's mouth opened, but no sound came out. I could see the memories reshaping themselves behind her eyes, the story she had told herself for 8 years, crumbling into something she did not know how to process. I did not feel satisfaction watching her struggle. I felt only the tired acknowledgement that this was how it had always been, me doing things that no one noticed, no one asked about, no one thought to question. I stepped back, turning, so that my voice would carry to my family, to the crowd, to the camera that was still recording everything. My mother had moved closer, her face a mask of barely controlled panic. My father stood frozen where I had left him. Aunts, uncles, cousins, all of them, watching, waiting, trying to understand what was happening to the family they thought they knew. I didn't come here for your graduation. Emma, I said, my voice calm and clear. I came to see if anyone would ask about my life. Just once. In nearly 2 hours, not one person did. Not even today. Not even when I'm about to receive one of the highest honors of my career. I let the silence stretch for a moment, watching my words land like stones dropped into still water. So here is my answer. You will never know where I am. You will never know what I do. And when people ask about me, you will have to say, I don't know, because you never wanted to know. My mother stepped forward, her voice sharp, with the desperation of someone watching control slip through her fingers. Grace, that's enough. We can talk about this privately. You're embarrassing the family in front of everyone. I turned to face her. For 34 years, that voice had made me feel small. That disapproval had shaped my choices, my silences, my careful efforts to avoid conflict. But standing there with a helicopter, waiting to take me to a ceremony she had never imagined I could earn, I felt nothing but clarity. No, mother, I said. For the first time, the family is seeing who you really are. I gestured toward my cousin, still holding her phone, still recording. My mother followed my gaze, and I watched the realization dawn on her face, the live stream, the viewers, the comments that were probably flooding in at that very moment. The narrative she had spent 30 years building, the story of the successful daughter and the disappointing one, the careful image she had presented to the world, all of it was collapsing, in real time, witnessed by everyone she had ever tried to impress. I was going to introduce you to my world, I continued, my voice steady. There's a support program for families of service members, counseling, community, a chance to understand what your loved ones go through. I had your names on the list. I paused, watching the flicker of hope in my mother's eyes, the desperate calculation that maybe she could still salvage something from this moment. I removed them this morning. You'll never be part of that world now. Not because I'm punishing you, but because you never earned the right to know me. The silence that followed was absolute. My mother stood frozen, her mouth open, her carefully constructed world lying in ruins around her. My father stared at the ground. Emma wept quietly, her hands covering her face. And beyond them, the crowd of graduation guests watched, in stunned fascination, witnesses to a family's unraveling. I turned back toward the helicopter. The officer was waiting by the open door, his face professionally neutral, giving no indication that he had heard anything. I walked toward him, my step steady, my heart calm. I placed one foot on the step, ready to climb inside, and then I paused, not from hesitation, not from doubt. There was one more thing I needed to say, one final truth, and then I would be gone from their lives forever. I turned back one last time. My family stood frozen in the wreckage of the moment, my mother, with her face drained of color, my father staring at the ground in shame. Emma still weeping, her hands pressed against her mouth, as if trying to hold back sounds she could not control. Behind them, the crowd of graduation guests watched in silence, witnesses to something they would talk about for years. I looked at all of them, and I felt no anger, no bitterness, only something that felt remarkably close to peace. I spent 34 years trying to earn a place in this family, I said, my voice carrying across the distance between us. Today I realized I never needed your approval. I needed my own. My mother opened her mouth to speak, but I did not give her the chance. Goodbye, Mother. I hope one day you understand the daughter you called useless is about to receive a medal from the Vice Admiral of the United States Navy. And you almost missed it because you were too busy celebrating someone else. I stepped into the helicopter. The officer followed, sliding the door closed behind us. Through the window, I could see my family still standing there, still frozen, still trying to comprehend what had just happened. The rotors began to spin faster, the noise building to a roar that drowned out everything else. And then we lifted off, rising above the graduation ceremony, above the campus, above the life I was leaving behind. I did not look down again. There was nothing left to see. 8 months later, I learned what had happened after I left. The video from Emma's graduation went viral within 48 hours. Someone had titled it, "The Navy Officer and Her Family," and it spread across social media with the unstoppable momentum of a story that resonated with millions. 2.3 million views, thousands of comments. I never watched it myself, but I heard about what people said. That mother should be ashamed. The father knew and said nothing for 12 years. Grace Kelly is a hero. Her family doesn't deserve her. Strangely, my face was never clearly visible in the footage. The rotor wash, the camera angles, the shadows, somehow they all conspired to keep me obscured. Only my family's reactions were crystal clear. My mother's shock, my father's confession, Emma's tears. The whole world could see them. But I remained what I had always been, invisible, except to those who knew where to look. The Kellys sold their house within 4 months and moved to another state. I learned this through channels I will not describe, information that crossed my desk as part of routine briefings. My mother stopped attending church, the community she had worked so hard to impress, had seen the video, and she could not face their questions. My father filed for divorce after 6 months. The silence between him and my mother had become unbearable, a void, filled with all the things he had never said and could never take back. Emma wrote to me. 7 letters, in 8 months, each one longer than the last, each one filled with apologies and questions and memories she was re-examining through new eyes. I remember you coming to my ballet recital when Mom couldn't make it. Was that always you? Was everything always you? The letters arrived at a Navy forwarding address, carefully screened before they reached me. I read every one. I kept them in a drawer in my office, not because I intended to respond, but because they were proof. Proof that some apologies come too late to repair what was broken. Proof that recognition without action is just guilt looking for relief. I never wrote back. Some doors once closed are meant to stay closed. My office now is small and functional, located at a base I cannot name in a place I cannot disclose. On the wall hangs my Distinguished Service Medal, framed beside the official commendation that accompanied it. I look at it sometimes not with pride exactly, but with the quiet satisfaction of knowing that I earned it through work that mattered, even if no one in my family ever understood what that work was. Next to the medal hangs a photograph I have carried for 27 years. It shows me at age 7, standing alone in my family's backyard, looking at something beyond the frame. I remember that day. I remember the feeling of being surrounded by people who were supposed to love me and realizing for the first time that I was completely alone. I did not have the words for it then. I do now. I touch the photograph, sometimes just briefly, before returning to my work. It reminds me of where I came from. It reminds me of why I left. And it reminds me that the little girl in that picture survived, not because anyone saved her, but because she learned to save herself. Last week, a routine intelligence briefing crossed my desk. One line caught my eye. Kelly family residence, sold. No forwarding address registered. I read it twice, then closed the file. I felt no satisfaction, no sadness, just the quiet sense of completion that comes when a chapter finally ends. I think sometimes about the women who might hear my story. Women my mother's age who spent their lives controlling narratives that were never theirs to control. Women my age who stayed silent too long, hoping that patience would eventually be rewarded with love. Women who are still waiting for permission to leave, still believing that family obligation outweighs self-preservation. I hope they understand what it took me 34 years to learn. You do not need anyone's approval to choose yourself. You do not need permission to walk away from people who refuse to see you. And you do not owe explanations to those who never bothered to ask questions. Some families teach you love. Some families teach you strength. Mine taught me the most important lesson of all, when to walk away and never look back. And that is where Grace's story ends. Not with revenge, not with hatred, but with freedom. She did not destroy her family. She simply stopped carrying them. She stopped waiting for love that was never coming. She stopped explaining herself to people who had already decided who she was. And in doing so, she finally found peace. But here is the lesson I hope you carry with you today. Grace's story is not about winning. It is about knowing your worth even when the people closest to you refuse to see it. It is about understanding that walking away is not weakness. Sometimes walking away is the bravest thing you can do. You do not owe your life to people who never valued it. You do not owe your silence to people who used it against you. And you do not need anyone's permission to choose yourself. If Grace's story touched your heart, if it reminded you of your own struggles, your own silent battles, your own moment of finally saying enough, then I hope you will share that with us. Leave a comment below and tell us, have you ever had to walk away from someone who refused to see you? What gave you the strength to finally choose yourself? And if this is your first time here, consider subscribing to our channel. Every week we bring you true stories of strength, resilience, and the courage it takes to rewrite your own ending. Thank you for watching. And remember, some doors are meant to be closed so better ones can open.